Listen closely because what I'm about to reveal sounds like a plot pulled directly from a high-stakes political thriller, but I assure you, this isn't a Hollywood script. We are witnessing a seismic shift in North American power that could change the map of our continent forever, and it is happening right now behind closed doors in real time. Picture this. You wake up to the news that a massive portion of America's closest ally is in active high-level negotiations with Washington to break away from its home country and form a brand new independent nation. Now take that a step further and realize that the Trump administration isn't just watching from the sidelines. They are actively fueling the fire, backing this separatist movement with financial promises so massive they would make your head spin. We are talking about a $500 billion commitment. That is $500 billion with a B. Before we dive into the details of this $500 billion secret and what it means for the future of the West, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now, hit that like button to support our research, and share this video with anyone who cares about the future of our borders. This is not some fringe conspiracy theory whispered in the dark corners of the internet by people in tinfoil hats. This is a documented reality, and it is moving forward with a speed that should take your breath away. My name is George Conway. And for decades, my life's work has been centered on analyzing political shifts, the intricacies of constitutional law, and the often strange, unpredictable paths that democratic governments take. But I have to be completely honest with you. In all my years of watching the political machinery on both sides of the border, I have never seen anything that even remotely compares to the drama currently unfolding between certain leaders in the Alberta provincial government and the Trump White House. The organization at the center of this storm is called the Alberta Prosperity Project. This is a group that has been tirelessly advocating for Alberta's independence from the rest of Canada, and they have reportedly just finished their third round of meetings with high-ranking Trump administration officials at the State Department level. The claims coming out of these meetings are nothing short of explosive, and they should be a major cause for concern for every person who values the stability of North American relations, the sanctity of democratic institutions, and the survival of our most important trading partner and ally. Let me be absolutely crystal clear about the gravity of what we are discussing here today. This isn't a group of academics sitting in a library having a theoretical debate about the philosophy of independence. According to Jeffrey Rath, one of the primary leaders of this separatist organization, these high-stakes meetings are occurring inside SCIFs. For those who don't know the jargon, SCIF stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facilities. These are the most secure, soundproof, and technologically shielded rooms in the United States government, places where the most highly classified and sensitive national security conversations on the planet happen. The individuals they are meeting with, at least according to Rath's own account, are leaving these rooms and walking directly into the Oval Office to brief the president. Take a moment to really let that sink in. The leader of a movement trying to pull a Canadian province out of its federation is claiming to have a direct, high-level pipeline to the President of the United States through intermediaries who provide personal briefings on their progress. Regardless of whether every single word of these claims is 100% accurate, the simple fact that these meetings are happening at all marks a monumental seismic shift in how the United States is handling its relationship with Canada. When you look at the substance of what was allegedly discussed in those secure rooms, it becomes even more mind-blowing. We are talking about a proposed $500 billion line of credit that would be fully collateralized by Alberta's massive oil and gas reserves. We are talking about ironclad guarantees for Alberta's retirees, which would involve converting their pensions from Canadian dollars to American dollars at a 1-to-1 par value. We are even talking about the planning of strategic pipeline routes that would cut through American states like Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon, giving a newly independent Alberta direct, unhindered access to the lucrative Pacific markets. This isn't just a helping hand. This is comprehensive, full-scale, nation-building support. If these reports are indeed accurate, the United States government is essentially offering to act as the financial heart and soul of a breakaway Canadian province. The Trump administration is reportedly setting itself up to provide every single tool and resource a new country would need to survive the brutal economic warfare that would undoubtedly follow a unilateral declaration of independence from Ottawa. Now, I want to hit the pause button for a second to provide some very necessary context for why this is happening. Alberta's frustrations with the Canadian federal government are not new, and to be fair, they are not entirely baseless. This is a province that has for many decades sent billions of dollars more to the federal treasury in Ottawa than it has ever received back in services or support. If you look at the numbers provided by Alberta's own premier, we are talking about a staggering $653 billion in net contributions since 1980. That is an almost unfathomable amount of wealth flowing out of a single province to subsidize the rest of the country. Albertans have stood by and watched as their lifeblood, the oil and gas industry, has been hammered by what they see as intentionally punitive regulations and calculated obstruction from federal authorities. They've watched as vital pipeline projects were killed, leaving their primary products landlocked and devalued, and they feel their economic interests are constantly being sacrificed to please the political elites in eastern Canada. That frustration is palpable. That anger is deeply rooted and genuine. To simply dismiss these concerns as provincial complaining would be a massive mistake. However, this is where the situation takes a turn into much more complicated and dangerous territory, and it's where my serious concerns really begin to take shape. The narrative being crafted by the Alberta Prosperity Project and apparently being adopted by parts of the Trump administration goes way beyond simple economic complaints. Jeffrey Rath is openly and explicitly invoking the Monroe Doctrine. This is a 19th century American policy that essentially declared the entire Western Hemisphere as the United States' exclusive sphere of influence, effectively telling European powers to stay out. He is framing the policies of the Canadian federal government not just as bad management, but as being dictated by the interests of Communist China. He is presenting the idea of Alberta's independence not as a local Canadian political issue, but as a vital matter of American national security. In his eyes, liberating Alberta's oil fields is a strategic necessity to push back against Chinese influence in the world. This is incredibly intense rhetoric, and it should make every serious observer stop and think very carefully about what is actually going on here. When I first began digging into the details of these reported secret meetings between the Alberta Prosperity Project and the Trump White House, my gut reaction was to follow the trail of money. If you really want to understand a complex political game, the financial deals usually reveal much more than any shiny press release or public speech ever could. What I discovered when I looked at the proposed financial skeleton of this independence plan was both impressive in its ambition and deeply alarming in its potential fallout. This isn't about vague words of encouragement or a good luck from Washington. We are looking at a concrete, highly detailed financial architecture designed specifically to ensure that Alberta's independence is economically sustainable from the very first hour. The crown jewel of this entire plan is that $500 billion line of credit. Let's break down exactly how this would function in the real world, because the specifics are where the true power lies. According to the description provided by Jeffrey Rath, this massive credit facility would use Alberta's untapped oil and gas reserves as the collateral. The very second a referendum was won and Alberta announced its intent to leave Canada, this $500 billion credit line would be activated. The goal, as Rath put it, is to ensure Alberta can walk into negotiations with the federal government in Ottawa from a position of overwhelming strength, not weakness. In other words, when the Canadian government inevitably tries to use economic sanctions or financial pressure to stop the separation, Alberta would have the massive financial weight of the United States behind them to weather the storm. The full faith and credit of the United States Treasury would, for all intents and purposes, be the safety net for the new Republic of Alberta. Think about the strategic weight of that. Historically, Canada's biggest weapon against a separatist province is economic leverage. A province trying to leave would usually face being cut off from federal payments, being kicked out of trade deals, losing access to the banking system, and facing every bit of financial pain Ottawa could inflict. These aren't just what-if scenarios. Back in 1995, when Quebec nearly voted to leave, the federal government made it very clear that the economic fallout would be devastating for the province. But with a $500 billion American backstop, that leverage simply disappears. Alberta could effectively walk away and ignore Ottawa's threats, knowing that Washington has their back. This is more than just a loan. It is the United States government stepping in to protect a breakaway province from the consequences of its own actions. If you're finding this analysis helpful and want to see more content breaking down the hidden forces shaping our world, take a second right now to leave a comment below with your thoughts on Alberta's future. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. The discussion regarding pension conversion is just as telling as the credit line. Every government knows that the most effective way to keep citizens loyal is to hold the keys to their retirement security. Pensions are the result of decades of hard work, a lifetime of taxes, and the hope of a peaceful old age. By offering to switch Alberta's pensions from Canadian dollars to American dollars at a 1-to-1 rate, the Trump administration would be cutting right through the biggest fear any separatist movement has to deal with. People in Alberta who might be on the fence about independence wouldn't have to stay awake at night wondering if their life savings would become worthless in a new country with a shaky new currency. They would have the assurance that the world's most powerful economy was personally guaranteeing their retirement. This is high-level political chess. Someone has put a lot of thought into how to make the idea of breaking up a country feel as painless and safe as possible for the average citizen. And then we have to talk about the pipeline. If you want to see the real reason why the Trump administration is so hungry for Alberta's independence, you have to look at the energy map. Alberta sits on the third largest oil reserves on the entire planet. It is a massive, world-altering amount of energy, but right now it is effectively stuck in a cage. The Canadian federal government has spent years blocking or slowing down the very pipelines Alberta needs to get its oil to the global market. The Keystone XL pipeline, a project Trump personally fought for, was killed by the Biden administration, leaving a legacy of deep bitterness. But an independent Alberta that is a close ally of the United States could just ignore Canada's environmental rules and regulatory red tape. The proposed plan is to run a pipeline from Alberta down through Idaho or Montana and then out through Washington or Oregon to the Pacific coast. Once that happens, Alberta's oil could skip the Canadian blockade and flow directly to Japan, South Korea, and other Asian nations that are currently stuck relying on the Middle East for their energy. This is where Jeffrey Rath's talk about China starts to come into focus, even if I personally find it very troubling. His argument, which he claims is shared by the Trump team, is that China actually benefits from keeping Alberta's oil trapped because it stops U.S. allies like Japan and South Korea from finding a different energy source. By this logic, helping Alberta break free isn't just about regional politics or money, it's a strategic move to undermine China's influence in the Pacific. Whether you buy into that argument or not, and I have plenty of doubts about it, you can easily see why it would be attractive to an administration that has made fighting China the core of its entire foreign policy. In this worldview, Alberta's independence isn't a Canadian domestic issue. It's a new front in the global battle for supremacy between the United States and China. But I have to be completely honest with you about the deep-seated concerns I have regarding this situation, because they are incredibly serious. What we are looking at is the United States government, or at least powerful factions within it, actively working to destabilize and potentially tear apart one of our most loyal and oldest allies. Canada has been at America's side through 2 global wars, the Cold War, the conflict in Korea, the war in Afghanistan, and more global crises than I can count. Our 2 nations share the longest undefended border in the world. Our economies are so intertwined they are almost one, and we have been friends for generations. And yet right now, we are seeing American officials holding secret meetings in high-security facilities with people whose entire goal is to rip Canada in 2. No matter how much Alberta might feel mistreated by Ottawa, and again, some of those feelings are justified, is this really the way the United States should be treating a friend? One of the most intriguing parts of this whole Alberta independence story, and something that really needs to be looked at under a microscope, is the legal path this would actually take. In many countries, even talking about leaving the nation is seen as a crime or an act of treason. But Canada is different. It actually has a pre-existing, legally established roadmap for how a province can leave. This makes the situation in Canada unique on the world stage, and it's a legal reality that the Alberta Prosperity Project is using as a central pillar of their pitch to the public. Understanding this legal background is the only way to truly understand the path forward. The most important law in this whole mess is something called the Clarity Act, which the Canadian Parliament passed back in the year 2000. This law was born out of the 1995 Quebec referendum, where the yes side for independence came within a single percentage point of winning. After that close call, the federal government asked the Supreme Court of Canada to decide if a province could just leave on its own. The court's 1998 ruling was very balanced. It stated that no province has the right to leave unilaterally under Canadian or international law, but, and this is a huge but, If a clear majority of people in a province vote yes to a very clear question about leaving, then the federal government has a democratic duty to respect that result. They would then be legally required to sit down and negotiate the terms of that separation. The Clarity Act turned that court ruling into official law. It says any province can try to leave through a vote, but the question on the ballot has to be simple and direct. There can't be any of the confusing, tricky wording that people complained about during the 1995 Quebec vote. If the question is clear and the majority is clear, the negotiations must begin. Now, the law doesn't actually say what percentage counts as a clear majority, which leaves a bit of a gray area for Parliament to decide later, but the core idea is now a part of the Canadian legal system. Peaceful legal separation is a real possibility if the people's will is expressed clearly. This is the legal foundation the Alberta Prosperity Project is standing on. One of the constitutional lawyers working with them has said quite clearly that there is a legal way to do this. Albertans don't have to pick up guns or start a revolution. They can just go to the ballot box and follow the rules of the Constitution. This is a very powerful selling point because it lets the independence movement look like respectable citizens exercising their rights rather than a bunch of radical rebels. They aren't trying to burn the system down. They are just asking their neighbors to vote on their future together. But this is where I think things get much more difficult than the independence leaders want to admit. Yes, the Clarity Act provides a path for talks, but it doesn't mean those talks will end in a new country. The federal government has to negotiate in good faith, but they also have to protect the interests of the millions of people in the rest of Canada. They would have to figure out how to divide up federal buildings and property, how to split the massive national debt, how to protect the rights of minorities and Indigenous peoples, how to handle existing treaties, where the new borders would be drawn, and who gets to keep their citizenship. Every single one of these issues is a nightmare to solve. There is absolutely no guarantee that the government in Ottawa and the government in Edmonton would ever agree on these massive problems. Furthermore, the fact that the U.S. government is involved raises massive questions about whether this is even a real democratic process anymore. When Jeffrey Rath talks about the Trump administration's enthusiastic support, and he describes those meetings in secret SCIFs with people who report to the president, and he talks about a $500 billion safety net that lets Alberta bully Ottawa at the table, he's not describing a local Canadian debate. He's describing a situation where a foreign superpower is putting its thumb on the scale of another country's democracy. The very same United States that has spent years being outraged about foreign interference in its own elections is now apparently providing direct material support to a group trying to break up an allied nation. I want to be very careful here. I believe in the right of people to choose their own path. If the people of Alberta truly want to be independent and they have a fair vote with a clear question and they choose to leave, then that choice should be honored. But that choice has to be real. It has to come from the hearts of Albertans themselves, not because a foreign government is offering them a $500 billion bribe to serve its own strategic goals. When the Trump administration waves a $500 billion check in front of Alberta, promises to fix their pensions, and offers them special pipeline deals, they aren't just supporting democracy. They are building the playground and deciding which games will be played. We have to ask the tough question, what is the real motive behind this American interest? Is it about helping Albertans? Is it about China? Or is it just about the oil? Alberta has some of the biggest oil reserves in the world. An independent Alberta that is a client state of the U.S. would give American oil companies and military planners access to that energy on terms that are much better than anything they could get from a unified Canada. The Monroe Doctrine isn't about freedom for others, it's about American control. It's about making sure the resources of this continent belong to the United States. As I sit here and process everything I've learned about the Trump administration's ties to the Alberta independence movement, I feel a deep sense of worry about where this is heading. We aren't talking about something that might happen in 20 or 30 years. According to Jeffrey Rath and his team, they are pushing for a vote in 2026. That is not a long time away. That is less than 2 years from right now. And if the reports about these State Department meetings are even close to the truth, the foundation for American support is being poured right now in secure rooms in Washington, D.C. Let me explain how I see this playing out if the momentum keeps building. First, you're going to see the political campaign inside Alberta get much more intense. The independence group will use the promise of American money to tell nervous voters that leaving won't cause a financial crash. They will point to the $500 billion, the pension deals, and the pipelines as proof that Alberta will be rich and stable from day one. Their strategy is to target the middle of the road, the people who aren't yet convinced either way. By making independence look like a safe, legal, and wealthy option, they hope to flip those voters to yes. If that campaign works and a vote is actually scheduled, the relationship between Ottawa and Edmonton will reach a breaking point. The Canadian government will be in a nightmare position. If they try to stop the vote or say it isn't legal, they look like they are ignoring the rights of their own people. The Clarity Act was made for this exact reason, to show that Canadians can vote on their future. Blocking it would look like a dictatorship, which would only push more people to want to leave. But if they just let the vote happen while Trump is openly backing the other side, it looks like they're letting America take over their country. And what if the vote passes? Let's imagine a world where Alberta votes yes to a clear question. Ottawa is then forced by law to negotiate. But what does a negotiation look like when one side has a $500 billion line of credit from the most powerful military and economy on earth? Usually, a negotiation works because both sides are afraid of losing something. Alberta would usually be afraid of their money losing value or being cut off from trade. But with Washington's help, they don't have to be afraid. They could just say no to everything Ottawa wants, knowing that Trump will catch them if they fall. This is a very dangerous situation. Canada wouldn't just be talking to Alberta, they would be talking to the United States. And in that fight, the power difference is huge. What can Ottawa do when the other side has the backing of the U.S. Treasury? Would Canada try to fight back with economic sanctions, risking a fight with Trump? Or would they just give in to everything Alberta wants, showing the world that any province with a powerful friend can destroy the country? Neither of those is a good outcome, and both would likely tear the rest of Canada apart. We also have to think about the example this sets for the rest of the world. What the Trump team is doing in Alberta is not a secret. They are meeting with separatists in secret bunkers, promising billions and helping carve a new country out of a friend's land. If this works, why wouldn't other countries do it? What if China started backing independence movements in U.S. allied countries? What if Russia, which already supports these kinds of groups, decided to turn up the heat? For a long time, the rule has been that big powers don't try to break up their friends. If the U.S. breaks that rule with Canada, the whole international system could fall apart. There is also something very dark about the words Jeffrey Rath and his American friends are using. He says the Canadian government is working for communist China. He says keeping Alberta's oil stuck is a Chinese victory. He says this is a war between the U.S. and China. This isn't just a bit of exaggeration, it's dangerous language. It turns a normal political disagreement about taxes and resources into a holy war against communism. It makes the people you disagree with into traitors and puppets. Once you start calling your political rivals traitors for China, you can't talk to them anymore. How can you have a fair negotiation with someone you think is a spy for a hostile power? This level of heat makes compromise impossible. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what I would say to the people in Alberta who are truly fed up. I want them to know that I hear them. $653 billion in net losses to the rest of the country is a lot of money to give away. Seeing your jobs and your industry killed by rules from people thousands of miles away is painful. Feeling like the people in big cities out east look down on you and don't care about your life is a real deep wound. But I would ask Albertans to look very closely at the path they are being shown. An independent Alberta with Trump's support might look like a great deal today. You get the money, the power, and you get to tell Ottawa to get lost. But what happens when that relationship stops being a partnership and starts being a trap? The United States isn't doing this to be nice. They aren't doing it because they love Albertan freedom. They are doing it for the oil, the resources, and the strategic location. Once Alberta's money, pipes, and markets are all tied to Washington, how much freedom will they really have? You might just be trading a boss in Ottawa for a much bigger, much more demanding boss in the United States. Also, I worry about what this does to the soul of Canada. Canada is a special place. It's a country that has stayed together despite being huge, having multiple languages, and having different cultures across a difficult landscape. It has stayed together because people chose to talk, to compromise, and to settle things through the law rather than through force or getting help from outside powers. The Clarity Act is proof of that. It's a promise that if you really want to go, we will talk about it fairly. But that whole system breaks when one side brings a superpower to the table. When the money and power of the world's biggest nation are used to tilt the scale, is that still a fair choice? I don't have all the answers to these hard questions. I wish I did. But I know for a fact that what is happening between the Trump administration and the Alberta independence movement is something we have never seen before in our history. The U.S. government is actively working to create the conditions for a close ally to crumble. Whether you think Alberta should leave or stay, whether you think Trump is a genius or a danger, you need to be watching this very closely. The results of this gamble for Alberta, for Canada, for the U.S., and for the world will be massive and will last for a long time. This is George Conway, and I'll be keeping a very close eye on this story as we move forward. You should do the same. This story is just getting started, and the stakes couldn't be higher for everyone involved.